In this episode, we're going to look at one of the foods that unfortunately does end up in a bin a lot, and that's bagged salad. It sounds crazy, but lettuces and salads so often end up in the bin. And what happens when it does end up in the bin? Why is composting so important? And what's happening to our soils? I'll be finding out why our food systems are so complex, and why the health of our soil is connected not only to the climate crisis, but to our human health too. I'm Max Amana, and this is Regeneration Food. In our homes, 79,000 tons of lettuce and leafy salads are wasted each year, and all of that is still perfectly edible. And on top of that, it takes 35 liters of water to produce just a single head of lettuce. And the cost of wasted lettuce to UK consumers each year is around 402 million pounds. 402. And that's just lettuce alone. But why is the UK salad industry so detrimental?
Most of the salad leaves that we're eating are little baby leaves that are very, very delicate. And our climate isn't really set up in the UK to be warm enough to have those salad leaves growing all year round. So that's where you're seeing farms with like huge polytunnels that need to be heated. They're using a high rate of pesticides and fungicides to control mildew. A lot of the leaves are washed in chlorinated water and then rinsed a few times. Then once you're moving along the packaging chain, you're obviously taking those bags of salad and you're putting them into single-use packaging, which mostly isn't yet recycled in the UK. You've got to put a protective gas into the bag to protect the leaves from getting damaged in transit. So if that amount of labour and effort is going into a foodstuff that we are then driving or walking or getting the bus to the supermarket and buying and taking home, and it's then basically going straight into the bin to maybe even create more methane, it's just bonkers.
So not only are we wasting huge amounts of food, but the way the food gets to our plates in the first place has a massive carbon footprint. I spoke with Rob from the Soil Association, who told me about why lettuce, in particular, can be so damaging to our soils, and why understanding soil health is so key to solving the climate crisis.
So all the salad leaves and leafy greens that we eat, they're tremendously healthy, but when they're grown non-organically, they're often sprayed with chemical pesticides. And these pesticides are a real concern. They end up in our soils, they end up in our rivers, they end up in our pollinators and our insects.
All right, so we're in front of a compost heap right now. Why is it important to compost than throwing your food into a landfill?
So if you're using a home compost system or a council composting scheme, you're both helping to minimize the carbon emissions that are released when that food goes into landfill, and you're also helping to recycle fertility, getting all that nutrients that are locked up in those scraps and bits of waste back into the land. The soils are our biggest carbon store, and if we treat them well, we can continue to capture carbon from the atmosphere and lock it back into the earth. But if we mistreat soils, if we farm intensively, then all that carbon is released and the soil becomes a contributor to the climate crisis instead of part of the solution.
As we learn more about our food systems and the climate crisis, it seems to keep coming back to our soils. Someone who understands this more than most is Dr. Zach Bush, a physician specializing in the microbiome and its relationship to our food and farming systems.
We've been consumptive in our behavior of farming really since the beginning of Western civilization. So for 1,100 years at least, we have been destroying soil systems, and therefore the CO2 accumulates. Carbon dioxide that's accumulating in our atmosphere to contribute to global warming right now is not our primary problem. CO2 is the currency of life on Earth. It's not a problem. It's not a toxin. The problem is we killed with poisons the lungs of the planet and killing her soils. This whole argument that global warming is being caused by CO2 is kind of like saying a patient with emphysema is dying of carbon dioxide. Well, they certainly have high CO2 levels in their bloodstream, and they may die of consequences of not being able to clear that CO2. But it's not the CO2 that's killing; it's the fact that they killed their lungs with the tobacco that is why they're dying of that disease. And it's the exact same story, I believe, here in regard to the planet. The planet has emphysema now. We are killing the lungs of the planet, and we are seeing the symptoms of that being CO2 and methane accumulation in the atmosphere.
So the scale of global solutions needs to be massive. But within our communities, there are still things that can be impactful on a local level. One of them is Made in Hackney, a community cookery school founded by Sarah Bentley.
The idea was to create a local hub where people could come and learn how to eat more plant-based foods, learn about organic food, local food, and learn practical cooking skills to improve their health.
So when you make it next time, I'm coming to your house.
When it comes to food waste, what we teach in our classes is how not to generate any in the first place. So we do a lot about using the whole vegetable, using a broccoli stalk, using carrot tops.
The tops have more vitamin C, far more vitamin C than the root. The root's still really good as well.
More?
But they have more vitamin C. There's loads of goodness in these tops.
We teach everyone how to do either home composting or how to use your local council food waste collection. And then if they don't have one, we teach people how to lobby their council for one. So we try and get it from all angles.
There are so many issues that people care about. Deforestation, climate change, wildlife loss, and soil can seem a bit abstract or removed, but actually all of these issues come back to the soil. Deforestation is a soil issue, climate change is a soil issue, our wildlife depends on soil. So the one thing that we encourage people to do is understand the power of their purchasing choices, that every time they eat, they're relating with soil one way or another, and there are huge benefits that can flow from just choosing one organic product. Soil is the basis of the world's entire food chain. All the above ground ecosystems that we live within ultimately depend on the ecosystems that exist within the soil. So we have to care for the soil. We're not going to tackle the climate crisis unless we care for the soil. We're not going to be able to protect species and preserve wildlife unless we look after the ground beneath our feet.
For the last episode of this series, we're going to bring it all together. Your leftover salad, your herbs, bread and potatoes, and those bits of veg into a delicious meal. First up, a tip to keep your salad fresh. When you get home, take it out of the bag and rinse it. Dry it with a tea towel, wrap it up, and place it back into your fridge, or into a container if you prefer. If your salad is starting to look past its best, a great way to use it up is by chucking it into a soup. This seriously delicious and flavorsome green soup uses up broccoli stems, herbs, and your leftover salad. Soups are really versatile and you can chop and change this with whatever you have going. We're also going to make croutons to go on top. Great for using up leftover bits of bread, and you can see more on that in episode 2 of this series. To start, preheat your oven to 200 degrees. Chop 1 clove of garlic and 1 thumb-sized piece of ginger. Add 2 teaspoons of olive oil to a saucepan, and when it's warm, add the ginger and garlic. Next, prep your broccoli. Cut the stalk into small chunks and add it in with the garlic and ginger. Add your broccoli florets to a baking tray, drizzle lightly with olive oil, season with salt and pepper, and roast in the oven for 15 minutes until they're cooked through and a little charred. Add 500 milliliters of veg stock and leave to cook for 15 minutes. Thinly slice your radishes to go on top, putting aside the leaves for later. When your broccoli stems are cooked, add a handful of greens, the radish leaves, and herbs. Today, I'm using leftover parsley. You can also use spinach, kale, rocket, basil, coriander, whatever you like. Blend it all together before serving. To top off my soup, I'm making a few croutons from a chunk of bread that's gone a bit stale. Add your croutons, thinly sliced radishes, and roasted broccoli florets, and enjoy. Keep it in the fridge in a sealed container or freeze it for another day. And finally, we're gonna put some of those greens to use in an easy and protein-rich burger patty packed with healthy ingredients. We're also gonna make homemade chips that are a great way to use up any leftover potatoes you have. This is a great recipe to celebrate the food you have and share it with your friends. The burger patties also freeze really well for leftovers later in the week. If you're making chips, start with these. Preheat your oven to 200 degrees. Cut your potatoes into chunks. Pop them on a baking tray with a little bit of olive oil, salt, pepper, and a pinch of smoked paprika. Place in the oven for 30 to 40 minutes until soft and crunchy and golden brown on the outside. And in the meantime, let's make your burger patties. To start, chop up your herbs and add it to a mixing bowl with your salad leaves. Add 1 clove of garlic. Add a tin of chickpeas. Next, add peas. I'm using tin today, but you can also defrost some frozen peas and add those instead. Blitz all this up with a stick blender or in a food processor until you have a thick paste, scraping the sides down as you go. Add a teaspoon of salt and pepper. 100 grams of oat flour. I made this just by whizzing up oats with a hand blender. 100 grams of chickpea or gram flour and mix well. Take a small handful of the mixture, shape it into a burger patty, and place it on a baking sheet. For the last few minutes of oven time, add an optional slice of cheese onto your burger patties so it melts. Now it's time to prep your other toppings and assemble your burger. Start with a toasted bun. Next, I'm adding a little of my leftover herb stem pesto that I made in the last episode. Then your salad. I'm using a couple of spinach leaves. Then your burger, a slice of tomato or two, sliced red onions, and a little ketchup, and there you have it. Wow. In this series, we've seen food waste across all levels. On the farms, up and down supply chains, but most of all, in our own homes. We've learned how to make the most of our food, utilizing every part of the ingredient, root to stem. How to portion better, share better, use our freezers better. Our food systems are some of the most complex in the world, and the full extent of its impact can be a lot to comprehend. But it's important to understand the responsibility we have as consumers, to appreciate where our food comes from, what we can do with it, and what happens to it when we waste it. And wasting food does have a massive impact, as we've seen. As our planet changes, businesses, organizations, supermarkets are also changing, but it doesn't stop there. How can we collectively, all together, be part of the solution and not part of the problem? Thank you for joining us. This is Regeneration Food.